I'm Catherine Satch from the Royal Geographical Society, the RGS, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this second webinar for geography students about the career opportunities opened up by studying geography. This second webinar is on the public sector, careers in government, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by three experts in the field, Patrick Rickles, Vanessa Pilley, and Lucy Allen. And so over the next 45 minutes, you're going to hear from the three of them about why they pursued their careers. They're going to be offering you some advice and some guidance. Now, we're going to encourage you to ask questions, so please do post those into the chat, into Slido. And Alex, who's overseeing that, will feed the questions into us, and we hope to pick them up in terms of some of the answers on the webinar. But if we don't, we'll be pulling together some resources, pulling together some additional answers to those questions, and we'll circulate those in an email to you afterwards with some links and some guidance, along with the video, we hope, of this particular webinar. So look out for that after the event. But what I'm going to do first is I'm going to turn over to our experts, and I'm going to ask them to just briefly introduce themselves, to tell us a little bit about their background and their career to date and their role right now. So Patrick, over to you first.
Right, thank you, Catherine. Hi, everybody. My name is Patrick Rickles. I am currently the head of digital skills and innovation at the Oil and Gas Authority. In my current role, I focus on understanding our levels of digital literacy in the organization, how we use various bits of technology, with a focus in particular on geographic information science, geographic information systems, but also supporting people in their ambitions with using things such as platforms from the M365, Microsoft 365, Office 365 stack, as well as being a project management coach, trainer around agile methodologies. And I also do a lot of research and development, innovating with new technologies. I have a background in a bit of development and programming, so I use some of that to explore our data sets and particularly unlock the opportunities using artificial intelligence and machine learning capabilities within the organization. I am also, that's one part of my role. Another side role that I have is I'm also the deputy head for the government geography profession with a particular focus on diversity and inclusion. I'm focused on understanding our members of the profession, who they are, where they came from, and how we can better support them. And because of that programmer developer background, I also end up doing a lot of tech support for the profession, launching our websites, developing our member website, managing our blogs, and doing communications via our newsletters and tweets and other things. How I got here was a little bit of a strange journey. I'm originally from the United States. You can probably tell a little bit from my accent. I had started off in actually computer science. I wanted to be a video game programmer. And then I was in university and I came across this technology, geographic information systems. And it's like, oh my goodness, that is what I want to do. I ended up going out to do a master's in that at UCL, which brought me over here to the UK. And I really just wanted to see how we could use GIS in a number of different industries: oil and gas, software engineering, urban remediation, environmental planning. And eventually, after spending a bit of time in private sector, moving into academia, where I was a full-time researcher and a part-time PhD student, where I focused on GIS education. I then found my way into public sector, and here I am.
Excellent, thank you. I think there's a whole webinar in your background, Patrick. And we'll come back to some of the EDI elements a little bit later on, because there's probably some questions and specific things and guidance we can give on that. Lucy, over to you.
Well, thank you. So my name's Lucy Allen. In terms of my background, I have a geography undergraduate and an environmental master's degree. Actually worked at the Society for several years at the start of my career for Catherine, so on professional accreditation and promoting the study of geography. But how I got into government was about 5 years ago. I joined the Civil Service as a fast stream social researcher into the Department for Work and Pensions. I've worked in a couple of roles there, including running several sort of large-scale commissioned research projects, a few in particular with employers and employees to help evaluate the pension policy of automatic enrolment. But my role now involves leading a team which is doing analysis and modelling around digital skills and capability, variety of things, but mainly providing evidence to support the department's business strategy. It involves working with lots of different people, kind of colleagues working on policy, with designers in digital service developments, and also other government departments as well.
Excellent, thank you, Lucy. And it's great to see you back at the Society through this webinar. Vanessa, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Catherine. My name is Vanessa Pilley. I originally did my degree as a dual honours, actually, and it was in geography and geology. And then I did a postgrad in disaster management, and I specialised in risk perception of natural hazards. I started an NGO outside work after that and went off to India and Tanzania to deliver these hazard workshops. But I was fortunate enough to have my dad convince me to apply for a proper job before I disappeared abroad. On a whim, I applied to the civil service and have been in it since 2009. I started at the Ministry of Defence on a science graduate scheme, and I predominantly looked at environmental impacts from defence activities, so things like typhoon jets and nuclear submarines. After a few years, I fancied a change, so I jumped departments and moved to DEFRA, the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. I had sort of two dual hats on, really. I looked after the Met Office Hadley Centre Climate Programme with what was DEC, the Department for Energy and Climate Change. And I also had actually geography in my job title. I was a geography evidence advisor. So I coordinated the geographers across DEFRA and its agencies. I also set up a cross-government working group around sort of the geography skills and strategy that we needed across departments to avoid duplication. And I did that again for several years, and then I moved on to a different department, and I moved to the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, the very catchy, long-winded title that is. And I actually worked on a European programme, so around the North Sea, looking at sort of eco-innovation and projects across borders to tackle problems that had been identified across the sea basin. And then I moved back to DEFRA in September. Sort of whilst this has all been going on, I also decided to volunteer at Bristol Zoo, so I do that every Friday. Yeah, civil servant for 4 days a week, and then I get to talk to actual people and look at animals for 1 day a week. Back to you, Catherine.
Okay, that's brilliant, thank you. And hopefully everybody can see just kind of what a wealth of experience that you've had. Very different pathways, working in lots of different government departments, all of them in Whitehall. And I think that's one of the things that we probably want to acknowledge up front, that we do recognise this is focused on England for those of you in the devolved authorities, and also you know, many of the roles and the opportunities we're talking about are also present at regional and local levels. So we'll make sure we've got some resources on that as well. But I think you've given a really nice description about your roles, your kind of career pathways. I know many people who are on this webinar, many undergraduates are kind of thinking about how they get into the civil service. You've all had slightly different pathways in. They're thinking about what can they be doing right now through the course of their studies, through maybe volunteering, through other activities. What advice might you have in terms of kind of getting into the sector, getting into the public sector? Lucy, can I come to you first on that one?
Yes, that's fine. I'd probably suggest looking at maybe some of the fast stream or mainstream applications. There's a lot of information online about those, because if you really look into those in detail, you can sort of get an idea of if that's something that would interest you in terms of what we do, but also it gives you an idea of what you need to apply, and that might help you when thinking about what sort of things you're doing at university or outside that might help you build that evidence that you need to get into the civil service. Yeah, depending on what you study, social research is probably a good route for most geographers. If you're more comfortable with numbers and things, statistician's also a good route, and obviously there's a geography route as well. Yeah, I think that's probably my main bit of advice, is just have a look at some of the different options out there for you.
Great. Vanessa?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, really, because I think it quite often depends on your personal circumstance. So one thing you quite often see on sort of entry-level jobs is about sort of volunteering and extracurricular experience, and that's all very well and good if you've got the finances behind that to do it. But I think increasingly you are seeing things like internships and apprenticeships that are paid, and I think they're always a good way to sort of get that stepping stone in. I think it's also worth considering even in your undergrad. I thought about my postgrad quite late in the day, but I wish I'd kind of thought about it a bit earlier. And I think that's really crucial depending on what sort of job you want to go into. So quite often in government you hear about sort of generalists and specialists, and it's not always as easy as, you know, what degree you've got, but obviously if you go down the postgrad and the PhD route, you probably are leading towards a more specialist role. But that doesn't mean that the generalist roles are any less important, but they perhaps, if you don't go on to do a postgraduate, can be the way you get in. As Lucy says, there's lots of schemes out there. Mm-hmm. I think the other thing for me is about looking at the professional frameworks that exist, a little bit in the same way that Lucy outlined. It's not for sort of doing now as such, but it gives you an idea of what recruiters are going to be looking for. So quite often the Chartered Geography Framework, the Geography Profession Framework, there's also the Government Science and Engineering Career Framework. All of those are really important to start to understand what government skills are valued and what they're looking for in job interviews and in your application. So I think they're sort of my tips for sort of getting into the sector. I think also just I would add one further point if I can, Catherine, and that's very few jobs will have geography in it. So you might need to start thinking about what it is you actually like in the geography field, which can be so broad. And that really will help you, I think, in terms of your looking for a job. It doesn't necessarily help you apply, but I think certainly, you know, if you're putting in geography government jobs, although it's growing, you know, there's few jobs labelled as that unless you sort of go down the sort of GIS route. So that's probably just something I'd like to flag.
Yeah, that's a really important point, Vanessa, and we'll maybe come back to that in just a moment. Patrick, any other advice you'd like to offer?
Well, yeah, sure. So to complement Lucy and Vanessa, one of the programs that I'm aware of, or well, actually there are a series of programs. So to explain, when we're talking about generalists and analysts, the government analysis function is being set up as a centralized function for all analysts in government. At the moment, there are 4 main analyst bodies, professional bodies, which are government science and social research services, government statistical services, government operational research services, and government economics services. And in each of those, of course, we've also got the geography profession and other professions that fall underneath the analysis function. But those 4 main ones are very well established in government, and they each should have, at the very least 2 of them I know, social research and statistics, have what's called a sandwich placement program. And the sandwich placement program, if you Google it, you'll be able to find it, is a summer placement for students. So you finished, let's say, for example, 2 years of university, and you come into you apply for the program. If you're accepted into it, you'll then work in government for the summer, and then you go and complete your last year of university. That's an excellent way to get some work experience before you've even completed your studies, and that will help you get a competitive advantage for not only getting employment anywhere because you'll already have some experience, but it'll also give you a competitive advantage for civil service jobs because you've already got some experience in civil service. And then with regard to career frameworks, there is the analysis function career framework that, again, if you Google it, you can find it. I've got links for all of this, which I can provide. I'm happy to do so. But in the analysis function career framework, we in the government geography profession have worked closely with them to define 5 key roles that geographers do inside of government. And these are geospatial coordinators, geographic information analysts, multidisciplinary geographers who are people who aren't necessarily the tech experts, the GIS experts, but rather they use geography as part of place-based understanding to advise on policies that will positively impact communities. So we've got a number of resources that are out there already that could provide further information that you could sort of interweave into the work that you're already doing in your studies. From my perspective, and again, I'm just largely focusing on tech because that's my area. I work in tech. If you are looking for a career as a GIS analyst, a GIS developer, having certain tech skills are very useful. Of course, you shouldn't just put all of your eggs in one basket and just do everything that's ArcGIS. It's important to know other geospatial packages. QGIS is another one that's very commonly used. And depending upon the organization you go in, you might either have ArcGIS or QGIS, but you should be able to shift relatively quickly. The main programming languages that people are using as far as data science analytics are concerned in government as well as in academia, because I still keep contact there, are actually Python and R. So learning one or both of them can also be useful as a skill to showcase that when you get out of university, you've already got some understanding of those technologies and you can come in as a junior level developer and work your way up.
Great, thank you. I think what's great about this call is that the 3 of you, although sitting in government as geographers, have got very different types of roles in terms of whether environment, social research, more the tech kind of GIS, geospatial. And I think it's just sort of showcasing, certainly to me, the breadth of opportunities for geographers, and comes back to Vanessa's point, which I think was a really important one, which is about kind of identifying what's really important to you in terms of what you're interested in, and also picking up on the points that Vanessa and Lucy have made in terms of there are these specialist roles, but there are also these more kind of general roles where you can be taking some of those more transferable skills, some of those interests you might have about communities or environment or whatever it is, and bringing those within you. There's some very specific questions that have appeared in the chat, which maybe we'll pick up those now, and then we'll come back to maybe some of the more general comments. Patrick, I'd like maybe to talk a little bit more about kind of EDI and maybe some of the very specific initiatives there in terms of entryways into the public sector. But picking up a couple of the questions in the chat, one of them is about advice resources you can share with applicants for the civil service verbal and numerical tests. There's a second one about how competitive civil service applications are. I think the answer to that one is pretty competitive, and probably even more so, but that shouldn't put you off. But any advice in terms of, for those people who might be thinking of going down the fast stream route or taking some of the kind of the entry tests, any advice there that you can give?
So I can start. I mean, the basic thing I'd look for is the what used to be called the competency-based framework, but is now success profiles. Again, we can share links, but I think it relatively comes up quite quickly and easily on Google as well. There's a lot of stock put in them in the recruitment process. It's how you're sifted on your initial application. It's how you're then sifted in your interview. So it's kind of one of those fundamental things that I think you kind of need to get right from the off. Patrick's gone into a lot of the technical detail, but I think to get even the generalist roles, not to mention the specialist ones too, you need to have the sort of the competencies and skills that government's looking for, and they're not overly technical. They're more, I would say, the sort of softer skills, the people-based ones. sort of understanding, you know, strategic thinking and making decisions and influencing. And of course, I think that's where, you know, geography is one of those great subjects, because it teaches you those skills as well. So you're best placed. I mean, geography is a very recruitable degree. That the skills that you learn are highly desirable by recruiters. So I think it's about understanding how to communicate them in your application and interview. That's
Great.
probably the biggest thing I'd flag from my end.
Great. Lucy, anything you'd like to add to that?
I think I'm thinking about the verb. It's a little while since I did some of these tests, but in terms of the numeracy ones as well, practice. I think that's the main thing I'd say. There should hopefully be some examples of what you need, and there should be some resources out on the internet which will help you do that. So if you're not confident about that, just practice and you should be able to get through, hopefully.
Great. Patrick, anything else to offer into this?
Ooh, well, so for the four main analytical professions, they each have their own entry criteria. So as much as we've got the success profiles for just general applications to the civil service, if you wanted to become an analyst, you will also have to look at the various analytical functions, the various analytical professions, individual competency frameworks. So economic service, for example, will have further things that they will assess you on. And in order to do that assessment, you will have to, if you're applying for an analyst role, not only will you have to fill out the generalist competencies, but you'll also have to create examples for the analyst competencies. And in your interview, you will also have to take an online test to show your understanding of those competencies. And so, like, for example, if you're going into statistics, it will ask you a number of statistical questions that you'll have to do some maths on to come to the answers. And if you don't pass those tests, then unfortunately you won't go forward as a candidate to the interview, or you won't get the job in the end if you don't pass those analyst specific competencies. So that can be quite challenging. I'll say, as far as somebody who has come from outside of civil service to begin with in my career, over the course of my 15 years in the GI industry, I've only been in civil service for 3 years, and coming into civil service was very different in comparison to other industries. I'm very comfortable writing a CV and a covering letter. That's a practice that is starting to be up and coming in civil service. It mainly relies on the success profiles or the competencies, and those need to be written in a very specific way. It's 250 words, but you will rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it to refine it to make sure that it is written in a very specific way, where you talk about, this is my situation, this is my task, here are all the actions that I did, and then here was the result. And you need to conform every example in your success profile to that model. And if you don't follow that model, you'll be scored less on your competency or your competency examples. So if you're not familiar with how to write those things, do find as much information as you can on how to do that. And if you know somebody in civil service, get in touch with them to ask them to review your competencies. Speaking just for myself, if you have any questions while you're trying to do those applications, Catherine, you're more than welcome to share my details. You can get in touch with me. I'm happy to review your competencies to help.
Great. That's incredibly helpful. There's some clear messages there in terms of kind of doing research, taking time, refining, and certainly in the resources that we'll share afterwards, we'll be making links through to some of these kind of success profiles, and also some examples of kind of connecting what it is that you might be doing as an undergraduate, both through your studies, through extracurricular activities, volunteering, part-time roles, all of those sorts of things, in terms of being able to provide the best evidence and to make that really compelling application. Now, there was a question a little bit ago that I want to come back to, which is where these jobs are. You're not, I know a couple of you are in London, but Vanessa, you're not in London, are you?
No, and I never have been. So I originally lived in Bristol, but I now live in a little cottage in rural Somerset. So no, the big city doesn't really appeal to me. I think I mean, when I first joined the civil service, because I was based at the Ministry of Defence, there's a huge site in Bristol, and I'm originally from the Midlands, as you may be able to tell from my accent, and I moved down purely for the job. I wasn't based in Bristol. I didn't go to university in Bristol. And then whilst I was there, when I moved over to DEFRA, I just wasn't keen to move to London, and very luckily had an open-minded line manager at the time that was very laid back about remote home working. As the years have gone by, there's an increasing trend and a recognition that you do not have to be in London. There are, of course, jobs that are London-based. There's no getting around that. Catherine mentioned earlier about devolved administrations and Whitehall, and the difference between government departments and their UK remit. And there are some jobs, especially working for ministers, for instance, that still require you to be in London. I've never been asked to move to London. I wouldn't move to London. And I currently work in the Chief Scientific Advisor's office, which is quite, a sort of seen traditionally as quite a London-centric office. But actually most of the staff are very scattered, very geographically dispersed around the UK. And it works really well. And I think, to take an opportunity from COVID rather than one of the many negatives that it's caused, I think this year has increasingly proved that with technology, it is very easy to work remotely. And increasingly, if you go on the civil service jobs website and you look at the jobs, there is often very broad areas of where you can work. It might say we're based here, but actually you can remote work, or we've got offices in various different cities and you can be located in any of them. So I feel quite passionately about the London question, because I think it does put a lot of people off, and I don't necessarily think that today it's a big stumbling block.
Great. No, thank you. I thought you'd be able to kind of hit that one off directly. That's great. Maybe a question that I'll bring to you first, Lucy, and maybe in terms of reflecting in terms of those in your team. There's a few questions coming in around the relative merit or not of master's degrees, in the sense of, does that help? Does it not help? Is it required? All of you in various different forms, have done additional training. What's your perspective on that in terms of that question about a master's degree?
So it's definitely not required for any of the entry requirements. I think it's usually an undergraduate degree if it's predominantly in the particular subject. If you're applying for one of the specialised analyst roles, it's a really nice thing to have. There are actually opportunities within certainly within social research, and I'm pretty sure within the other professions as well, where you can get part funding to do masters while you're working. So I know people do go down that route. There's also, I think, a economics sort of apprenticeship that's while studying, which I think is just opening up, which again that might be another route that other professions go down as well. So yeah, it's definitely not a requirement, but there are opportunities if you wanted to do one while you're in work in the civil service.
Okay, really, really, really helpful. Thank you. Patrick, there's been a couple of other questions in the chat around some of kind of EDI dimensions and some of the particular initiatives. There was a question also from mature students wanting to try and get into the civil service. Do you want to say a little bit about that with your kind of deputy head of geography hat on?
Yeah, sure. So, in comparison to other industries that I've worked in, the civil service, crown service, and public service that I've worked in has just been incredibly welcoming and embracing of people from diverse backgrounds. I think also tied into an earlier question asked, what's our day-to-day work life like? We have a very healthy work-life balance, and we try and maintain it. Our seniors are very supportive of that. They want to make sure that we have appropriate rest so that way we can optimally perform in our jobs. We have good annual leave, which is also important. But tying into the question of EDI, if you're somebody who has caring duties, or if you're somebody who has any, or if you're somebody who has a disability, the civil service is extremely supportive of that, with providing you flexible working opportunities. Your line managers should, almost all of us, we take appropriate training for unconscious bias, for supporting people with various disabilities, people from various backgrounds. And, you know, I feel like that's something that a lot of industries don't have. They don't have managers who understand that. And really, it's just to say that it doesn't matter what your life circumstance is. You will get a fair opportunity to interview in the civil service. I can see another question that has just come up and also came up before. This is probably also linked to EDI, is that, and you can tell from me that not everybody in civil service, Crown service, public service, are from the UK. And so to answer the question of whether you need to be from the UK or a British citizen, the answer is that it depends on certain departments. So some departments will have the ability to sponsor people from other countries that require a visa. Some departments will not be able to. But regardless of where you're from, if you do have a legal right to work here and be here in the UK, we will always support people from wherever they're from. I have colleagues who are from a variety of different countries, and yeah, we celebrate those diverse backgrounds.
Great, no, that's really helpful, and thank you for picking up that question. I think you've probably answered this by describing the pathways that you've got to your current role. But is there a common career pathway? I mean, is there sort of an obvious route, entryway in and through the civil service? And thank you, Patrick, for using the more inclusive term of what we're talking about here in terms of all of the different agencies and authorities. Vanessa, is there a common pathway? Is there somewhere that you should be looking to start to kind of progress? Thought you were going to shake your head.
No, I mean, because I work in DEFRA, there's a lot of people with environmental and geography backgrounds. I don't think I've ever met somebody that's done anything remotely similar. So everybody is so different, and you get you know, the people that come and they've done a PhD and worked in academia and spent a long time, you know, looking at a particular plant, and then they come into civil service. And then you get the ones that you know, left school and didn't go to university at all, and you know, worked their way up and started maybe apprenticeships with agencies, and then come into central government, or just work their way up through the grades. And then you've got others that do the sort of university degree and then the graduate entry sort of schemes, and then come that way. And to be honest, I don't really think it matters. I think that's the important bit. It's not even that there's no route, it's the fact it doesn't matter. I mean, the more variety you have in a team, the more experience, the more knowledge you have, makes you better at either whether you're a policy job or an operational delivery job. But I think that it's the skill sets are really important, more than the sort of source of those skills.
Great. Lucy, any comments on that? You're obviously managing a team, probably quite a diverse team, I'd imagine, in terms of skills and expertise.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I found myself managing a team of all the other analytical professions. So having to actually draw on the breadth of knowledge that I've developed through doing geography has been so helpful. I don't know if other people with different backgrounds might find it a bit more tricky to start with, but just having that sort of being comfortable with the statistics and numbers, as well as the more kind of qualitative research, which are more familiar from research methods that you might do in a geography degree, it just is a really useful base. And yeah, the more diversity, the better. You get all the different opinions and interpretations, and come to what is the best advice, which is kind of our role really, is from what evidence we've got, what is the best advice you can give to inform any particular policy or development that your work is needed for.
No, thank you. You've drawn out very nicely the kind of the value added of a geographer. And we hear this in a number of different sectors in terms of that ability to be able to be kind of sympathetic to, but also to synthesize kind of different ways of thinking, different ways of collecting data, to be kind of critical of evidence, to understand, you know, place, communities, people, the environment. Yeah, great. So, and I think that's something that in some of the guidance we share also in terms of for applicants is thinking about how to make the most of that kind of geographical training in terms of responding to these success profiles and various different things. Another question, and it's kind of come up in different forms, is about this process of kind of applying. You know, we've been saying you've got to take time to research, it takes time. Obviously, as an undergraduate, you've got lots of demands on your time, your studies, you may be working, you may be applying for a master's. You know, does it make sense to be doing all of that at the same time, or does it make sense to kind of, you know, do one thing, take a little bit of time, think? Vanessa, you made a point about kind of crafting and recrafting, and Patrick echoed this too, applications. What's your advice here in terms of, should someone in the last year of their undergraduate finishing their dissertation, maybe applying for a master's to keep options open, kind of also put themselves through the hoops for the civil service at the same time?
Do you want me to expand on my
Sorry,
point?
Vanessa, apologies, yeah. Vanessa.
No,
yeah,
no, that's fine. I mean, I applied for the civil service from India, so I don't necessarily think it's as time consuming and effortful as perhaps maybe mistakenly we've implied it is. There's certainly lots of hoops to jump through, and it's a sort of bit of a clunky system, unfortunately, and there's a knack to it. But I certainly don't think it takes a huge amount of time. There is, for quite a lot of the entry schemes, what's called an assessment centre. So you have to go, and it's a sort of series of interviews and maybe a psychometric test if you decide to work for the Ministry of Defence, and some other basic literacy and numeracy tests. So obviously you have to be in the country for that. That's handy. And you have to be free for that day. But I think the rest, especially, you know, it's just online, and it's just about sort of, you can dip in and out, and the competencies you can build slowly, and you know, when you need that break from an essay, then spend half an hour drafting one of your competencies or skills. I don't think it's that time consuming, if I'm honest. And I certainly think, I mean, I'm all about keeping your options open. So if I was in your shoes, then yes, I'd be applying for a postgrad and a few jobs, and then, you know, see what comes back, and then make the decision of what you want to do, almost, rather than sort of cut out options and go down routes by default of what you have or have not applied for. So no, I'd certainly throw an application in. Yeah.
Patrick, anything to add to that? You're going to be a dissenting voice, or are you going to agree with what Vanessa's just said?
No, largely agree. You know, personally, I'm crazy. I take on a lot of different things, you know, hence why I'm a deputy head of the geography profession in my evening time, and then head of digital skills and innovation in my daytime. Coming towards the end of your studies happened to me in my master's, happened to me in my PhD. It's a crazy busy time. You are trying to work and study, or you're trying to study and do your exams and get your dissertations and such pulled together. And then you're also applying for jobs, and the competencies when you're doing applications in civil service, like, give yourself some time, because you will be rewriting and rewriting and rewriting those competencies. You don't just write 250 words once, you refine it. And that can take time, and it's really hard, but you know, it pays off by having that dedication.
Great. Lucy, anything to add to that?
Well, I mean, I can apply for things around a full-time job, so that shows you you should have the time to do it if you're doing a full-time degree. So yeah, that's all I'd add.
Yeah. We're sort of running towards the end, but there's been a few questions. A recurrent question is about kind of internships and placements. And Patrick, you spoke really clearly about kind of some of the sandwich opportunities. But any comments more generally, either within the civil service, within the public sector, or more widely about work experience, placements, internships?
Yeah, there's one thing I'd add, which is, I think this is in other departments as well, but there are options for a placement year as well, not just a summer experience. So depending on your degrees, depending what stage you're at, and if that's an option within your degree, then you could apply to spend a whole year, get paid, and also build up the experience and examples that you need directly from that year. And I've seen a lot of people go through that route and then apply for a mainstream or fast stream post and then be able to take that up straight after they finish their degree. So there's other options as well there.
Yeah, I'd also add that, you know, this actually comes back to another question that was asked on whether to go more general or more specific, depending upon what you're trying to do. I think it ultimately comes down to your interests as well. So if, for example, just because I'm working there at the moment, if, for example, your interest is in oil and gas, then if you focus your program on oil and gas or do a dissertation around oil and gas or whatever the case is, then you know you're carving out a very specialist role for yourself there. And then if you talk to the various departments and see what they're doing, you could potentially find an opportunity to work with the department, either to shadow, just see what people are doing there. People will generally invite you into a department just as a day to show you what they do in their day-to-day life. But also for your dissertation, if that's something that you wanted to focus on, like oil and gas, if you got in touch with me, I would show you the work that we have available in the organization, and we could help structure a dissertation around that. And that would be really good in the way of not only seeing what we do inside of a department, but also showing that you have relevant work experience in that industry, if that's something that you want to go into.
Vanessa, DEFRA has lots and lots of geographers, and there's obviously opportunities within DEFRA, but looking across your colleagues, those you work with, what about not only within government, but more generally kind of internship placement opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to internships, it's really just about keeping your eye on the opportunities and applying as soon as you see them. There's sort of numerous schemes that you can sort of Google and join, but I think it's just about you know, having the luck of applying for them, really. I think we can get a bit too bogged down with focusing on lots of internships and sandwich placements and extra stuff. You know, just to give a sort of alternative perspective, I didn't do any of those through any of my degrees. I just studied and I did my field work, and I, you know, enjoyed myself. And I think there can sometimes be this sort of incredible pressure on students to try and do lots and different things. And you know, I'd maybe point out that, you know, enjoy your time whilst you've got it, and do modules that you enjoy, and do a dissertation that you really feel passionately about, because when you're typing it up at 1 o'clock in the morning, you're going to need that passion. It's not about whether it makes the UK government happy or not. Catherine, if I can just use my time before you go on to the next picture, and answer a couple of quick questions, because there's quite a lot coming up about whether you can reapply if you get rejected. So if you sign up to the Civil Service Jobs website, you can apply for as many jobs as you want. There is no, once you've done it once, you can't apply again. So that's a very quick answer for that. And then there's also been a question, and I wanted to answer this because this is what I've done, about different experiences within different departments outside of internships and apprenticeships and schemes, formal schemes. So as I mentioned, I left DEFRA for 4 years and moved to MHCLG, and that was an intergovernmental loan. So I stayed as a DEFRA employee, but they loaned me out to another government department. And then when that loan was finished, I returned to DEFRA. So even when you're midway, 2/3, nearly retirement, you can always go and jump to another department and go on loan. And I mean, I haven't done it, but I've also known colleagues that have gone external and gone and worked in academia. Academics have come and worked in departments as research fellows. There's also been a few examples of people that have worked in the private sector. So no, you don't have to be part of formal schemes to jump about. Sorry, Catherine, I just wanted to answer those questions because I know we're short on time.
Absolutely great, Vanessa. And I think what's been really lovely today is the different perspective, the different pathways you've taken in terms of and coming back to Patrick's comment about that kind of diversity and that kind of recognition and value in that diversity, which applies to people's backgrounds and pathways and the opportunities they've been able to take up. But yes, with an eye to the clock and the fact that you're returning to your day jobs this afternoon, so thank you for sharing your lunch break with us. Are there any kind of final comments or pieces of advice that you'd like to share with all those people attending today? Patrick, maybe to you first. Any last words you'd like to, or things you've already said that you'd just like to kind of re-stress or reiterate?
Yeah, sure. So just to immediately note, I've pasted some links in the chat that are to the sandwich placement programs and some information about the geography profession career framework, as well as jobs in geography across government. I think my advice is that really the civil service is changing. In that, you know, it always used to be the case that if you wanted to advance really quickly in civil service, get into the fast stream, be an economist, and you will move up. But I think now actually the civil service is realizing that in order to evolve across departments, across organizations, we need diversity. And that diversity is important not only from people's personal backgrounds, but also from various industries. So there is more latitude with regard to evaluating people from academia and from private sector. And I think it's important to have that breadth of experience across industries because you can draw from it in so many different ways. You know, I worked in oil and gas initially when I started my job, or when I started my career, and I had no idea that today I'll end up working for the regulatory body for oil and gas. So, you know, it's the fact that I had that experience to begin with that brought me, that helped me be a credible candidate for this right now. So, you know, really try your hand at a variety of different things, find what interests you, and ultimately, as you advance in your career, the jobs and the opportunities that are around you will tailor themselves to your interest, and you'll have to curate that as well. So just think laterally about what you're doing and always try and find the opportunities wherever they might be.
That's wonderful, Patrick. Thank you. Lucy?
Yeah, I'd agree with all of that. I suppose I'd say that it's not something you necessarily have to get into straight after university. I found that having a different job and getting a load of experience from that, I'm not sure I could have developed the evidence and examples I'd have needed just from university. So having that other job, but also discovering kind of the key things that I really enjoyed in that job that I was doing in terms of actual data analysis. I thought this is brilliant, and then discovering a job that you could do that in. That's what really attracted me to civil service and the particular roles that I applied for. So yeah, I don't kind of absolutely look at the breadth of things, find something that interests you, and once you found it, go for it and take all the opportunities you can. So you get out of it as much as you put in. So use that when you've got it.
Thank you, Lucy. And Vanessa, last word with you.
I actually have two top bits of advice, so there you go. So I think the first one is around, I think we often, when we talk about the transition from university to employment, you kind of see it as a cliff edge of, I've done my training, now I'm going to do my job, and then that's it. And I guess it's a plug for once you're in your role. I think what would be really nice is if there was a sort of an appreciation that actually that's just the start of your career, and you're going to have to spend the rest of your career continuously training. And, you know, if you become chartered or not, it doesn't really matter. You still need to be constantly thinking in the civil service and in other sectors, to be fair, about continual professional development and keeping your skills up to date. So I think, you know, it is really important to, you know, do parts of your degree that you enjoy, and then specialize if you want, and then come into government, into a job that you enjoy, because you're constantly going to have to be upskilling in that area to stay relevant and up to date. So it was a plug for that. And then I just wanted to finish really on what I've observed as sort of the latest inside knowledge that I could share, really. And that is the growing emergence of something called system sciences, which, a bit of a cynic, to me it's geography, but I'll pretend I didn't say that. But it seems to be emerging in the sort of environmental sector and in DEFRA and our agencies as sort of this upcoming holistic interdisciplinary subject that allows people to think about various environmental cycles and the impact of society in a geospatial manner. Hence why I believe it is geography at its core. But I wanted to flag it really because I think it's going to be one of those growing areas. And I think if there's modules in your current degrees that you could do to cover it, or maybe you see a summer course, something like that, I think that would be the sorts of thing that if you wanted a sort of without having to go and do sort of specialist masters or PhDs, then that may be one thing just to consider as something that I've observed as an emerging trend.
No, thank you. That's really good, and really good to put alongside you know, some of the things that Patrick was also talking about in terms of data science and the value of location data, geospatial, and obviously the realm of place. And you know, most of the issues we're hearing about at the moment in the UK have to do with regional inequalities or differences. So there's kind of core tenets of geography about place and environment and around geospatial data kind of coming through very clearly. Thank you to the three of you. You've been incredibly generous with your time, your insights, your knowledge. You've shared a huge amount in terms of ideas of placements, resources, frameworks. And what we'll do is we'll have a go at pulling some of that together in terms of the resources we put online. Obviously, encourage anybody who's interested to kind of Google and go onto the appropriate websites, but we will try and pull some of this together. And also some of our other guidance that we've got in terms of some of the kind of the advice, some of the reflective advice about making the most of your degree, providing evidence, thinking about, you know, how you might approach responding to some of these success profiles, these kind of competency frameworks as well. So we'll pull that together. So for those of you who've been listening, thank you too. You'll see an email coming out shortly with a follow-up, but let me just finish by thanking again our three panelists today. So thank you, Patrick, Vanessa, and Lucy. Really appreciate it.